So thank you, everyone. So my name is Harin Contractor. I'm with the Burning Glass Institute. For those who probably don't know, the Burning Glass Institute, we're a nonprofit. It's about 3 years old. It's a spinoff of Burning Glass Technologies. We're one of the innovators on using labor market data to try to drive at skills adjacencies and help create pathways for those to move up in through their jobs. And so we use a lot of innovative and proprietary data, whether it's through job postings or career transitions, to help state, local governments, businesses, local workforce organizations, not only in the US, but around the globe actually, to look at opportunities to move up through their jobs. We do research projects, we do a lot of stuff with metrics. And prior to joining Burning Glass, I was the director of labor policy at the White House National Economic Council under President Biden, where I led workforce policy for the Biden administration. We did a number of initiatives, and we'll get into that a little bit. But one of the reasons I moved to Burning Glass, you all may agree, some of the work I had done throughout my career, and particularly at the White House, I saw a massive disconnect between supply side data and demand side data, right? So supply side providers in the education community and demand side signals that we get from employers. And you all know, you probably taken basic economics. So the best ways to make efficient markets when you have supply and data demands, meet. And we're not seeing that in the education workforce space, whether education is not innovating enough or whether employers have a hard time communicating the exact proficiencies of skills they might need. And so that's one of the reasons I joined Burning Glass. I felt there's an opportunity there to help align supply and demand data. So I'll kind of give an overview before I turn it over to my colleague and panelist here. Nish thought I'd get this, do the level setting. So one of the reasons we talked about this panel is, when we first came to the White House, we were amidst the global pandemic was still raging, right? We not only were just rolling out the vaccines, we had a number of variants. And so our first and foremost job at the White House was trying to control the COVID pandemic and trying to get the economy kickstarted. Obviously, we did a number of stimulus packages. People may disagree about the size of the package and whether that contributed to inflation, but we saw inflation was a global trend. But we were basically firefighters. We had to put out the fire that was immediately ahead of us. But we didn't want to just address the fire. As we're going to a tighter labor market, we thought this is an opportunity, as President Biden said, to build back better. And so how do we actually build a more resilient economy in the midst of a pandemic? And so right now we're about to go into this probably new era of supply chain shocks due to tariffs and global trade. But let's take that for example. Supply chains were crunched all over the world, and particularly in the United States. We had a lot of shipments backing up at the ports. But when we started peeling back the layers of, wow, inflation's starting to creep up, supply chains are crunched. What is happening here? When we take a look at supply chains in the United States, and it's probably similar globally, they are built on bad jobs, right? It's a very fragile system. Supply chains, if you go to the ports, one of the main pieces you need to get stuff from the ports out into the community are trucks, right? Truck drivers are independent contractors. They get paid by the mile. They do not get paid by the hour. So there was no incentive for a truck driver to sit and wait 3 or 4 hours at the port of New York or at LA to get a haul and move it out. Therefore, with that lack of incentive, you had more boxes and boxes piling up. And so how do you address this? And so one of my main jobs was to drive a thing called the Biden Trucking Action Plan, where I became the trucking czar, is to figure out how you fix the trucking industry in 3 months. And so kind of a big job. How do we do this? And so we thought about this area of can you attack this area of independent contractors as we're getting to more demand for truck drivers. So we created this opportunity called a Registered Apprenticeship Accelerator. Apprenticeships are not big in the United States, but we thought, hey, maybe this might be a good way to drive job quality through training. Because if you're a registered apprentice, you are a W-2 employee. You get more incentives to wait. You get more health and benefits. You are part of a company. You are not just your own independent contractor that is driven by the by the spot market. You're driven by the contract market. And so we got 120 companies to sign up in 3 months to be new registered apprentices, right? And we got a whole vast new of apprentices in the trucking industry, because one thing that we found was that trucking caused deaths was going up like this. It was exponential because there's more trucks on the road. Everyone wants to order everything on Amazon Prime. I want it right now. But that is the unintended consequence, and the external spillovers were hurting us and our families. But if you're a registered apprentice, you go through quality training. You have 3 months of where you have quality safety checks. And we have the data that if you are an apprentice, your safety records are so much better than if you're just an independent contractor by going to some certification that is not certified. No one knows what that is. And so that actually drove insurance costs down, which helped bring more employers to the table. And so I'm not saying we solved the supply chain crisis in 3 months, but we certainly shifted the trucking industry. Unfortunately, a lot of that's being pulled back now, but that is a microcosm of what we tried to do in the Biden administration was to try to address not only things in the pandemic supply chain by building back better, but how to use workforce development to do that. We were starting to think about how we did this with AI because as we started to settle in the tight labor market, we knew AI technology was coming, was going to affect a lot of things. How do you make that more worker centric? Unfortunately, we never got the chance to finish the job as we did not win the election, but here we are. But I think that's a big question. I'm going to ask my panelists about that, but I want to turn it over to him as to talk about his background and his work.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Harin. Before I take on my background, I have this quick speech I wrote. My name is Chaste Inegbedion. I'm honored to serve as the Chief Period Officer at Sanicle, which is a femtech startup on a mission to redefine workplace wellness from menstrual to menopause care, which is powered by AI and built for B2B and B2G employers. I want to first thank Equal Innovations for this opportunities and the Johns Hopkins University for curating this essential space, especially as we gather on the sidelines of the World Bank and IMF spring meetings where the future of development is being shaped. As the world debates fiscal policy and economic recovery, we must not overlook a vital pillar of prosperity, the health and dignity of women and people who menstruate. At Sanicle, we believe wellness is economic infrastructure, and that means designing tools that support the entire hormonal journey from menstrual cycles to menopause. Why does this matter? Because the students you see working part-time today or full-time are either Gen Z or Gen Alpha, are interns who are going to be future directors and policymakers. And if we don't design for their realities now, we will lose them to burnout, bias, or broken system. Sanicle is helping employers across corporations, government agencies, and campuses like Johns Hopkins, and few students I see in the room are from the Georgetown universities who are attending, uses AI to power personalized preventive wellness benefits from period poverty reduction to menopause support, from intern onboarding to executive retention. We are building software that doesn't just track productivity, it protects wellness, offering a safety net for workers who face layoffs, ensuring their access to wellness services continues just like insurance. And that's what the future of work looks like, not just flexible jobs, but flexible care, inclusive data, and wellness as a service. And thank you for including me in this conversation. But I would like to take you truly through my background because you'll be wondering what will a guy be doing speaking about menstrual and menopause. No pun intended, I love women so much. And I started my journey with activities around rape. We're promoting, because I saw it was another gender war that men has to be involved with issues around rape. We were creating the awareness that it was not just about what ladies were wearing, because I come from Nigeria. Then in a couple of years again, I went into raising awareness about female genital mutilation. There was a case of a young girl who was to be used for ritual purposes in northern Nigeria, and we needed money for a vaginoplasty operation. That's a reconstruction of a vagina and rectum, and we needed to fundraise, went into the community, raised money for a successful surgery. Then on the last day of the conversation of presenting our report to the correspondent chapel at one of the government house in northern Nigeria, we're speaking excitedly about how we were successful with the project. And one of the media person was like, a lot of nonprofit just talk about hosting events, doing projects, but they do not execute to completion. And there was a case of going online the next day was to find out that people were putting some things on Twitter. I'd rather get pregnant rather than be on my period. If only men were on their periods, maybe parts would be raining down from the skies. sex is a choice, why is condom free and sanitary pads were expensive. I saw a gender war was about to happen. I spoke to a lot of my media friends at that time, but they were like, Chase, what's with you with women problems? People at times will even say, are you a pervert? Why is it that and now you're going into menstruation? Even women struggle to talk about menstruation. It's a taboo subject. But to cut the long story short, we went into community, creating platforms to getting even men into the conversation. And fast forward, I moved to the United States and I saw that it was also a very bigger problem. We were watching movies like Coming to America, and we believe when we get into the US, we're going to just pick up dollars on the floor, like there were money everywhere. So why would period poverty be an issue even in the US? So with the United Nations Rotary Club, we will go into communities, shelter homes, we were giving out pads, but we saw that that was also not self-sustaining. So I also wrote a book called The Period Passport, which was like a father-daughter guide, because even fathers leave it to their mothers to say, okay, this is your mother's business to take care of you. I can have such conversation. But looking forward, we're able to start using entertainment as an intervention. Like during the opening night of the Wakanda movie, we hosted the Women of Wakanda Summit. We're getting women to have this conversation. We took a bunch of people to dress up in white in honor of the late Chadwick Boseman to see how much more, because you are not going to just publicize like I'm hosting an event on period and expect people to show up. But it was also a good way to be able to educate and provide that awareness. So we're using different events like the Martin Luther King Day, the International Women's Day, to create that sensitization, to make sure people were aware. But during that journey, we created something for the first time in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which was the Black Menstrual Health Summit. And during that conversation, we discovered that beyond just nonprofit getting sanitary towels, menstrual kits, they were having conversations that how do you bridge that gap between one child who's raising up from age 8 to when they turn to menopause, who is going to have those conversations with them? How do you start using technology? And that was where we bettered Sanicle.cloud, the intervention about women in the workplace leveraging artificial intelligence, making sure there was a wellness community where they could have this conversation and get a kind of support. And that's how Sanicle.cloud journey started. And beyond that, we'll be able to see that just using technology, leveraging entertainment, this is a conversation that must be taken seriously. And we tell employers that it's not just an health issue, it's a business issue. $150 billion is lost in productivity from absenteeism and presenteeism, from women who want to leave their job because they feel their employers do not care or provide them the kind of resources they need. Especially strong cultural taboos that still leverage the fact that employers also want to be able to support, put a bunch of tampons in the restroom, and these women say, maybe tampon is a sexual toy, I want to use it, or my grandma says it's not something effective to use, or peer pressure limited by their friends saying that you should be able to explore other alternatives. Like I have a spouse who says she grew up knowing just to use the always pad and never know that there were other sanitary pads like a menstrual cup, there's a period pause. There were an array of period products that people are still not sensitized to know, and that's why we're taking on this journey and this advocacy, just beyond the fact that we're a technology company, but we're also sharing that impact. Thank you.
That's great. And you mentioned AI. It seems to be all the rage of the conversations these days. It'd be interesting to get your perspective on how you are seeing AI as it relates to skill development and workforce development. There is a legit fear among policymakers that there'll be massive displacement due to automation, and whether we have whether we're training for those right skills, or whether we need how we're going to prepare for a workforce that may no longer be looking like the one they are now. So I know Mr. Johnny gave the example of India. Their big growth has been in information technologies, the same way in parts of Africa, but they may not have those jobs potentially anymore. So it would be interesting to get your perspective how you look at that.
Sure. Like we're in the era of DeepSeek, Gemini, ChatGPT, and beyond those tools, a lot of people say it will also be a time to cut down on their workforce because they have certain tools who can help them accelerate faster. But the question is, humanity comes beyond just having those tools. I love the fact that I could wake up in the morning and in my workplace, I meet that woman at the door who is able to even welcome me in the morning and giving me that such smile to be able to show that I'm having such an engaging day. But truly, these tools are also very important. Like, I can't tell you how much I combine my DeepSeek, my Gemini, and also ChatGPT when I'm just sending out an email, as simple as that. But truly, improving some of those tools are some of the policies that even need to be taken into consideration. The fact that not every workforce or not every technical company can provide subscription for some of those services or accelerate them in a while where we started speaking about the fact that it has gotten into a time where even startup companies are being given credits. For example, you get cloud credit from the likes of AWS, Microsoft. But the question is, like, there are certain companies who don't even still have a website. So when these tools are supposed to help accelerate, the question is, how are we also leveraging policymakers to making sure that beyond the fact that these two exist, can people still keep their jobs? And if they're even keeping their jobs, like the rate of the federal government job recent announcement with Elon Musk, where emails were sent out to federal workers just to inquire if they were doing their jobs and if they were at their workplace. How do we change that sort of intervention? But it still looks very dicey right now if we want to keep a larger workforce. But I say the conversations are changing right now where even startups like ourselves, a bigger push is when we're able to say we have 10, 20 employees, those retractions when people say you can employ more people. But right now, even if you have 6 employees or less, and you're using the relevant AI tools, they help you scale faster and accelerate. But it's still very dicey if we want to have a room where we'll just all depend on AI and everybody works from home.
Yeah, I think my major fear is that a lot of the companies are moving without workers and workers being at the center. When we've seen this movie before in the past where they try to bring in robots or different levels of automation without it being worker centric, then they failed. A lot of us who have darker skin pigmentation when we try to go to the water fountains, right, or to wash our hands, and it doesn't work. And that, again, is an example where they didn't put workers at the center, and we could, and again, as AI is only as good as the input that comes in, that is my fear. There's going to be a divergence where the folks who take advantage are the ones who are already building it, rather than the workers who actually may apply to. So to another question, you're dealing with a lot of folks on the ground in terms of your workforce readiness. How have you seen career readiness change, particularly coming out of the pandemic? One of the issues we have in the United States is that in our K-12 system, we've seen test scores fall precipitously since the pandemic and have not come back. And there is a fear that we will have a less ready workforce as they finish their primary schooling. And so how have you seen that in your work in other countries?
I see that a lot of that has taken a lot of change. Like, we were at a conference yesterday at Conrad, and like, just the way we're having conversations, somebody says another policy could have changed right now. We've seen a lot of people either saying, do they still want to stay in school or they want to drop out of schools? We've read about the story of the year students who got some couple of millions for the product they were building, and people say, if I can start building certain technology that could get funded, I pretty much don't have to leverage my 5 years in the university or get out of school. But the true picture of things is, like, how do we even change the readiness of career readiness in terms of trainings that are being provided? We get to attend career programs, job fairs. There were lots of job fairs while I was growing up. But right now, those things have changed. And the true picture is also that if I take on also these job fairs, are we getting jobs on the spot? A lot of people will say, thanks to their university, they were able to get intern opportunities and get into the job workforce. But right now, tools are also being used as AI to help you rewrite your resume, to help you prepare your CVs. And right now, there's also a conversation on LinkedIn now that even the open to work banner doesn't work this way anymore. Nobody's getting that job. And true questions, I think we had also a conversation with my friend Bobola, who's going to be speaking later on, is we have the time now where people are not even getting this job anymore. You do 6 interviews. I had the opportunity of having 7 interviews, assessment tests, just for me to get a letter that the job was taken internally. And I'm like, if this person was internally in the company, why put that sort of job out? But another thing we should also look into is also the improvement of structures, whereby you also have several organizations who provide reverse recruiting. They put it in a position of you saying, we help you get this job, then you pay us when you start earning salaries. But all of these things have changed with the new policies by the government. Federal workers now looking for jobs. People get a new job, and the next 3 months they get laid off, especially for a lot of tech companies. So we need to start looking at this thing holistically. What can change? What tools can be used? And how do we also help direct the fact that who do we hold responsible for certain companies who play on the intelligence of grabbing data of young people to use for their own company rather than employing them? So they put up a job that, oh, we are hiring for a program manager role, and a lot of people apply. And the next thing you see that job is no more available.
Yeah.
Then in the next 2 weeks or a month, you see the same job being reposted on LinkedIn, and you're like, why play trick on a lot of people? So certainly we need to be able to start calling all of these people out and start changing that way of approach for employers playing on the intelligence of people.
One thing, before we open it up to some questions, you talked a little bit about inclusive benefits for workers and post layoffs. So how do you see some of that public-private partnerships to ensure the priority of this B2B business spaces?
So I think one of the biggest thing is actually for us at Sanicle, for example, we see the issues of women's health not being as a nice to have, but as a must have, where employers see the need of adding continuity care. So even if people get laid off. So for example, when I got laid off from my tech company where I was working as a product manager and I lost my insurance, I couldn't get dental care anymore, I couldn't get vision care.
Yeah.
How do you provide those proceedings whereby there's a continuity care support model where even when people get laid off, they still get this kind of support? Secondly, another most important is wellness as a pet. You know, we talked about the fact that employers want to provide menstrual kit for women in the bathroom, but the facility manager is replenishing it, is putting it back because people are not using it. How do you provide room whereby either is a discount card or is an employer reimbursement support where they can integrate safely into a CVS, for example, a Walgreens, to buy some care that are identified by themselves, or for remote workers, for example, who can work out from the kitchen space in the workspace to be able to get a partnership with an HelloFresh or Factor, for example, where they can get nutritional food. Another key factor is also that community integrated into the workplace system. Like for us, for example, we're able to identify that if there was a Slack support or Slack channel where even women can have their conversation anonymously, okay, why is my period, for example, taking longer? Why am I experiencing these back cramps? Another part is like, it's not just about women, we're also talking about women, men in the workplace having those understanding. So an example was a friend of ours who lost her job because she was not comfortable speaking to a supervisor that she was always having bad menstrual cramps, and she worked at a gas station. An example is also for a supervisor to be provided that knowledge-based understanding that Mary, for example, can have bad menstrual cramps and be dealing with pains, while you will have another lady called Sarah who has bad menstrual cramps and do not have pains at all. But you start comparing that, oh, you must be very lazy for why should Mary be having cramps and not feeling pains and you are feeling pains? They do not understand the body mechanism. And the same thing for inclusivity is where you are able to also provide that PEX that is needed. There should be this workplace wellness program taking on, because also men deal with a lot of things. I remember when I was dealing with gallbladder surgery, it's not expected for me to be at work on site. I would love to take on remote opportunities, but now you see jobs advising everybody to return to work.
Yes, which is a major concern, particularly here in DC, especially we want women to return to work. They have less flexible policies. It's counterintuitive. I do want to open it up, and then maybe we can have just an open dialogue with folks here and get their thoughts. But are there any initial questions of folks here right off the bat for us as it relates to workforce and startups?
Kareem, maybe if
Yeah.
you could, I don't know, I apologize, I stepped
Yeah,
out for a minute,
yeah.
but I don't know if you covered what the new technology space is, maybe from what you're seeing at Burning Glass and, overall as an economist.
Yeah,
Actually, let me ask you another question first.
sure,
So Hemang, you heard mention
Yeah.
that the drone company may know more than the economist.
right,
So as an economist.
yes.
What was your reaction to that, about how technology may be seeing things before the data?
No,
showing us?
it's fair, and I mentioned in my kickoff that we do see a diverse demand and supply signals, right? Like demand side signals from employers are not meeting the supply side signals from the training providers, or even what our data may be seeing. As much as our data is real time because we're getting postings and demand signals as quickly as employers post it, it may not get to the underlying proficiencies they may want, right? And so, well, we're starting to see more and more AI show up in our data, right? In terms of what we're seeing this weird shift, but we don't know how fast it's going to be. Where entry level jobs that typically get you up into the career ladder, let's say for whether it's like accounting, you see the mid-level manager now consuming more of that entry level work, right? And so now what is the opportunity for someone to get into that job? Because that entry level position is now gone. And so is there an opportunity to jump to the mid-skill job? We don't know. There is no pathway to that yet. And how employers and how workforce providers are thinking about to get to that mid-skill job. So we're called the double-edged sword. On one hand, we're seeing some of that entry-level career rungs get consumed by that middle level job. On the other hand, jobs that were further away that you may have required a 4-year degree for additional levels of experience and training are now more accessible. And so we've opened up a whole new slew of jobs and that have higher wages to folks who may have less experience on the career ladder. And so it is a double-edged sword, and we don't know how employers are thinking about that. They don't know how they're thinking about that because this is in real time. So I think that's why he had mentioned the drone folks may be seeing some of this more in real time than the economists do, because we're probably thinking a little bit more like, how is this going to shake out? Because it may shake out one way for one company, but a different way for company B. But as a sector, how are folks thinking about those jobs? And that's what we're thinking about every day. And I don't have a good answer for that. I don't know if folks think, I think right now what we're seeing in the AI like backlash is that, a year ago, everyone's like, oh, this is going to be, we're going to do all our back office and we're going to do all our internal messaging through AI. They're like, wait a minute, maybe it doesn't work as well. I mean, anyone who has experienced, a chat bot on, when your flight is delayed or everything's canceled, you're so frustrated. You're like, I just want to talk to a human being. Let me continue to press 0. But it's not working out that well, and it's getting frustrated. So maybe they'll get that corrected, but we don't know yet. I still think we're in the early stages, as much as Ezra Klein and other folks being like, it's here tomorrow. I don't know how it's going to work on practicality. And our data is seeing some of that shifting back. And so, but I appreciate that question. I think another thing that maybe we can ask folks here is, and you, then if with this with these technological changes, what are the underlying proficiencies that we need to focus on?
Yeah.
Right? Like, so people are now thinking, oh, maybe it's like, like 10 years when we were in the Obama administration, everyone was like, we need to do coding and we don't need to be psychology majors anymore. Now we're like, wait a minute, maybe we just need to do psychology majors and not coding. So it'd be interesting to hear what others have to say about that, what you might be seeing.
I think another thing I could add is, I noticed also in the space of time that a lot of times when even employers reach out about the certain jobs, they pretty much ask for a college degree. They specify they want you to have a master's, a doctorate, and they have ways whereby even these job descriptions are written with a bunch of asks. So a program manager role, a product manager role, a project manager role would be under one job title. Just like a social media role, for example, you want that person to be a journalist at the same time, you want them to take photographs at the same time, you want them to do editing, you want them to do videos all in one. So who do you call out for certain job descriptions where you expect these people, and at the end, you're not even compensating them as that factor.
That's right.
You want somebody to do 6 jobs in one, and you're providing them even less than $20 an hour to do such a job.
Yeah, and I think some of the issues we see in our data is that as much as everyone talks about skills-based hiring and that they want people with these level of skills, they still like the divergence of people with the skills rather than the degrees is still vast, right? Because degrees are still seen as a quality signaling mechanism that this person is trained well, and we don't have that with certifications or other things. So what is that quality signaling mechanism. I think the supply and demand market is still hasn't sussed that out. So as much as people talk about skills-based hiring, it has not become reality because we haven't replaced something to actually signal that this person has these qualifications, right, without a degree. And I think that's still something we're grappling with in the US and they're grappling with in other countries as well.
Fortunately, we have to stop
Yep.
there. So, want to thank Harin and Chase for their presentation.